For 3 years, the only sound that filled the Caruso estate after dark was the sound of a child screaming himself awake. Oliver Caruso was 6 years old, small for his age, and so afraid of sleep that he had learned to fight it the way other little boys fought bedtime baths. He would scratch at his own arms. He would throw things. He would sob until his voice gave out, and then he would keen, a thin, high, airless sound that the nannies described, in their resignation letters, as unbearable. 3 nannies in 8 months, 2 child psychologists, one from Montreal, one flown in from Zurich at considerable expense, a sleep specialist who had worked with trauma patients in conflict zones and said, quietly, on her way out, that she had never encountered anything quite like this. Oliver's father had hired them all, and Oliver's father had watched them all leave. Marcus Caruso ran the most powerful private logistics empire in Ontario. He controlled the movement of goods through 3 major ports, had the ear of half the provincial cabinet, and was rumoured, only ever rumoured, to have interests that did not appear on any government filing. He was 41 years old and looked like a man who had learned early that the world responded to stillness. He spoke quietly, he moved slowly. He had not raised his voice in public since the night 2 years ago when his wife, Helena, had been killed in a car accident on the 401. And even then, witnesses said, he had not shouted. He had simply gone very, very still. The night shift nurse at Sick Kids had told the social worker that Marcus arrived at the hospital and they told him his son had survived. He had sat down on the floor of the corridor. Not collapsed. Sat down, deliberately, like a building choosing to settle. Oliver had survived, but Oliver had not slept through a single night since. Nadia Okafor heard about the job the way she heard about most things that summer. Through her cousin Bia, who heard it from the receptionist at a family services agency downtown, who heard it from a placement coordinator who had run out of candidates and was getting desperate. The pay was extraordinary. The situation was, the coordinator said carefully, challenging. 2 previous placements had lasted less than 3 weeks combined. Nadia was 28 years old, had a bachelor's degree in early childhood education that she had never fully used, and owed her landlord 4 months of back rent. Her younger brother Joel was recovering from a surgery he could not afford, in a hospital that had already sent 2 letters about outstanding fees. Nadia had been working double shifts at a diner on Bloor Street for 6 months, and her feet hurt all the time, and she was tired in a way that had started to feel permanent. She said yes before the coordinator finished her sentence. The estate was in Rosedale, behind a stone wall and a gate that required a code she was given by text message 20 minutes before her interview. She buzzed at the intercom. A man's voice, flat, professional, told her to wait. She waited 4 minutes, she counted. The man who opened the door was not Marcus Caruso. He was shorter, broader, with the kind of face that had stopped apologizing for itself a long time ago. He introduced himself as Roy, head of household security, and looked at Nadia the way airport customs officers look at luggage they've decided to open. Not hostile, just certain they'll find something. He walked her through a house that felt like a museum that had recently had all the joy removed from it. Pale walls, expensive things placed with precision, fresh flowers in a vase that no one had arranged casually. It was beautiful, and it was completely airless. Marcus Caruso was standing at the window of his study when Roy showed her in. He didn't turn around immediately. When he did, Nadia had the impression of a man performing composure, the way a dam performs stillness, while the water behind it does whatever water does. He gestured to a chair. She sat. He remained standing. He picked up a file from his desk, her file, she realized, and read from it without looking at her. Nadia Okafor, born in Ottawa, grew up in Scarborough. Mother passed 4 years ago. Father returned to Lagos when you were 12. You raised your brother Joel, currently 24, currently at Toronto General recovering from a cardiac procedure. He looked up. The hospital bill is significant. Nadia's jaw tightened. That's accurate. The agency tells me you have no formal experience as a night carer. Your background is early childhood education, but you left that sector. He paused. You've been working that was immediate, ECE pay in this city. She stopped herself. Yes, I left that sector. Why do you want this position? She looked at him steadily. Because the pay would cover Joel's hospital bill and my rent arrears and give me 3 months of breathing room. I think you already know that. She paused. I'm also good with children, particularly children who are frightened. He studied her. She had the sense of being weighed on a scale she couldn't see. Oliver has not slept through the night in 31 months, Marcus said. The previous placements tried medication, progressive exposure therapy, night lights of varying intensities, white noise machines, and weighted blankets. None of it worked. He set down her file. He is not a difficult child during the day. He is a child who is terrified of what happens when the lights go out. What happens? Nadia asked. Something shifted in Marcus's expression. just slightly, just at the edges. He dreams about the accident. Or, we think he does. He can't always tell us. He was 4 when it happened. Some of what he remembers is, he stopped. He is not always able to separate what he saw from what he imagined. Nadia was quiet for a moment. Has anyone just asked him what he needs? In the night? Not what the psychologist recommends. What he needs. Marcus looked at her the way people look at something they haven't expected to encounter. No one has framed it quite that way. I'd like to meet him. Oliver was in the kitchen with the housekeeper, a compact Filipino woman named Grace who had worked for the Carusos for 11 years and looked at Nadia with an expression that combined relief and warning in equal measure. Oliver was sitting at the counter eating crackers and reading a picture book about volcanoes. He was small and dark-haired and had his father's stillness, except that on a 6-year-old, it looked like bracing rather than composure. He looked up at Nadia. "Are you the new one?" he asked. "I might be," Nadia said. "I'm Nadia. What are you reading?" He showed her the book. She sat down next to him and looked at it seriously. They talked about volcanoes for 11 minutes. When she stood up to leave, Oliver went back to his crackers without looking at her, but she caught Grace watching her with something she hadn't seen in the other woman's face before. Hope was too strong a word. She was hired. Roy informed her on the front steps. Mr. Caruso required a background check, which had already been completed, and a 2-week probationary period, during which she would have no days off and would be available between the hours of 8 p.m. and 7 a.m. Her accommodations would be the room adjacent to Oliver's. She was to alert Roy immediately if she had any concerns about security. Nadia asked why security was mentioned in the context of a child's nighttime care. Roy looked at her in a way that answered nothing. She started that Thursday. The first night, Oliver lasted until 9:40 before the crying began. Nadia was ready. She didn't turn on the overhead light. She sat on the floor of his room in the dark and said quietly, "I'm here." He cried for 20 minutes. She stayed on the floor. When the crying slowed, she started to talk. Not to him exactly, more alongside him. She talked about her mother, about the way her mother used to hum when she was cooking, a particular low sound, almost tuneless, that Nadia had only ever heard her make at the stove. It wasn't a song you'd find anywhere. It was just the sound her mother made when she was okay. Oliver stopped crying. He didn't sleep, but he stopped crying and sat in the dark listening to Nadia talk, and somewhere around 11:15 his breathing slowed, and at 11:40 he was asleep. Nadia sat on the floor for another 40 minutes to make sure it held. In the morning, Grace made her coffee without being asked, and Oliver showed her a drawing he'd made of a volcano. Marcus Caruso passed through the kitchen and paused when he saw her and did not say anything, but something in his face, that controlled, carefully managed face, shifted slightly. He nodded and kept walking. By the end of the first week, Oliver was sleeping by 10:30. By the end of the second week, by 10, he still woke sometimes, startled out of a dream, but he would call for Nadia, and she would come and sit on the floor and talk, and he would go back to sleep. He started drawing pictures and leaving them outside her door in the morning. Volcanoes, mostly, then dogs. Then, one morning, a drawing of 2 stick figures, one tall and one short, under what she was fairly certain was supposed to be a night sky. The staff moved quietly around this fact. Grace stopped looking at Nadia with that wary, provisional hope and started looking at her with something warmer. Roy remained Roy, watchful, unrevealing, but began saying good morning when she came into the kitchen, which, she gathered from Grace, was more than he'd offered the previous 2 placements. Marcus remained precise and correct and thoroughly unreadable. He checked in with her each morning at exactly 7, asked 2 or 3 targeted questions about the night, and listened to her answers with the focused, assessing attention of a man who had learned not to waste time. He always thanked her. He never said anything personal. Then, on a Wednesday night in November, 3 weeks into her placement, Oliver said something that changed the room. He'd woken at midnight, upset, and Nadia had come and sat with him, and after a while he'd calmed, and she'd started talking about her mother again, the humming. She'd never actually hummed the sound for him before. It felt too private, somehow. But that night, without quite deciding to, she did. She hummed it quietly, the way her mother used to at the stove, low and wandering and not quite a melody. Oliver went very still. "Mama used to make a sound like that," he said. Nadia stopped. "Not the same," Oliver said carefully, "but like it, like the same kind of sound." He was quiet for a moment. "She used to make it when she thought I was asleep. I wasn't always asleep." Nadia didn't move. "She'd sit by my bed," Oliver said, "after she thought I was asleep, and she'd just..." He made a small sound in the back of his throat, not musical. "I always knew she was there." Nadia's chest ached. "Can you do it again?" Oliver asked. "The sound you were making." She did. She hummed it through twice, low and soft, and Oliver lay down and pulled his blanket up to his chin and closed his eyes. She was still humming when Marcus appeared in the doorway. He'd heard it from the hall. He stood there, his hand on the door frame, and his face was not performing composure anymore. He looked like a man who had just heard something from very far away, or from a very long time ago. When Oliver was asleep, Nadia eased herself off the floor and stepped into the hall, and pulled the door to behind her. Marcus was still there. He was staring at the floor. "Where did you learn that?" His voice was very quiet. "She used to hum it when she was cooking. I don't know if it's a song, exactly. It's just something she did." Helena hummed it. He said the name without drama, just the fact of it. "My wife. I don't know where she learned it either. She did it when she was content, I suppose. When she thought no one was listening." He looked up. "Oliver has never mentioned it before. He's never described it. He said she did it after she thought he was asleep." Marcus looked at her with an expression she couldn't read, not quite suspicion, not quite grief. "Something more complex than either. You couldn't have known that," he said. "I didn't know anything," Nadia said. It was my mother's sound. I've never made it for anyone else." She paused. "I don't know how to explain it." He nodded slowly. "Neither do I." He was quiet for a moment. "Thank you for tonight." He walked back down the hall. Nadia stood by Oliver's door and listened to the house settle around her, and felt, for reasons she couldn't name, unsettled in her own bones. She told herself it was just the strangeness of the moment. Coincidence. The kind of accidental resonance that happens when grief is big enough and the house is quiet enough. She did not quite believe herself. The following morning, Roy found her in the kitchen before she could reach her coffee. "Mr. Caruso wants to see you. Not the usual morning check-in time, not the usual study. Roy's living room. 10 minutes. Something had tightened in Roy's face overnight. Marcus was standing when she came in. He had a tablet in his hand. He turned it so she could see the screen. It was a background report, much more detailed than anything an employment agency would run. It went back 2 generations. There were names, addresses, scanned documents. At the center of it was an entry from 1987, a property record in Sault Ste. Marie, registered to a woman named Adès Okafor, Nadia's grandmother. "Your grandmother lived in Sault Ste. Marie from 1984 to 1991, Marcus said. "She was a nurse at the General Hospital." He scrolled. "She was also, during that period, the private caregiver for a man named Arthur Vance Belmore." He looked at her. "Do you know that name?" Nadia shook her head. Arthur Vance Belmore was the patriarch of the Belmore family. Marcus set down the tablet. "Helena's family, my wife's grandfather. He had a stroke in 1986 and required full-time home care for 4 years. Your grandmother was his primary carer." He paused. "She lived in the house for 4 years." The silence between them was very loud. "I didn't know that," Nadia said. "I believe you," he said, and his voice was measured, careful, the voice of a man who was choosing to believe something rather than arriving at it naturally. "But I need you to understand how this appears." He folded his hands. "You arrive at this house, you settle my son in a way no one else has managed, and you carry a sound, a specific sound that my wife made, a sound she likely learned in the house where your grandmother lived." He looked at her directly. "You can see how that looks. Like I was sent here." Nadia said it flatly because she could see it was true from where he was standing. "Like someone wanted you here, for reasons that have nothing to do with Oliver." She wanted to argue. She looked at him instead and said, "What would I have been sent to do?" "I don't know yet. Then keep me under whatever watch you think is appropriate." Her voice was steady. She was surprised by how steady it was. "I'm not leaving. Joel's bills don't pause while you investigate me, and Oliver is finally sleeping. But I'm not going to pretend I understand what's happening any more than you do." Marcus studied her for a long moment. Then he said, "You don't leave the house after dark without Roy. Fine. And you don't discuss this conversation with anyone on the household staff. Fine." He nodded once, and something in the set of his shoulders didn't relax exactly, but acknowledged her. "Grace will have your coffee." He was wrong to trust her quickly. She knew that. She also knew, she felt it in the quiet, specific way she felt true things, that she had not been sent anywhere by anyone, that the humming was her mother's and her mother's alone, and that the connection to the Belmore family was a coincidence shaped like a sign, but made of something ordinary. Geography, time, a woman who needed work and knew how to care for people. Coincidences happen. They just feel unbearable when grief is involved. 3 nights later, Oliver woke up screaming. Not the usual waking, not the frightened, disoriented crying she'd learned to soothe. This was different. This was full-throated and animal, and it brought her out of bed before she was conscious of being awake. She ran to his room. Oliver was standing on his bed, his back against the headboard, staring at the window. His face was white. "There was someone," he said, "outside the window, looking in." They were on the 2nd floor. Nadia went to the window. She looked. Nothing. She sat down on Oliver's bed and put her arms around him and held him, and she hummed, and he slowly stopped shaking. But she looked at the window over his head, and the garden below it, and the dark edge of the property beyond the stone wall, and something cold moved through her that had nothing to do with the night air. When Oliver was settled, she went into the hall and text-fetched a single sentence. Oliver says someone was at his window. Please check the grounds. The response came in 40 seconds, already on it. She went back to Oliver's room and stayed until morning. Roy found boot marks in the garden soil below Oliver's window. The stone wall had been disturbed at one point, moss scraped off, a small depression in the top where someone had braced to look over. Whoever it was had not come in, had only looked. Marcus received this information with his characteristic stillness, but something behind his eyes was not still. The Belmore estate has been in legal dispute for 2 years, he said, to Roy, in the kitchen, not aware that Nadia was in the adjacent hallway, and could hear through the serving hatch Grace had left open. Helena's cousin Garrett has been contesting her portion of the estate. He believes that certain assets should have reverted to the Belmore family trust when she died, rather than passing to Oliver through her will. A pause. If something were to happen to Oliver's legal standing, if his guardianship were called into question, or if evidence surfaced of neglect in his care, Garrett could apply for a reassessment. And the woman, Roy said. Nadia understood that she was the woman. You think Garrett placed her? I think Garrett is methodical and patient and has spent 2 years losing in court. Another pause. I think the timing is worth examining. Nadia walked into the kitchen. Both men turned. I could hear you, she said. The hatch. She looked at Marcus. I want to say something, and I want you to actually listen. He waited. Someone looked in at your son's window 3 nights ago, Nadia said. That frightened him. Oliver is finally sleeping. He is making drawings and talking about things, and he ate dinner without prompting last week, which Grace told me he hasn't done in 4 months. She took a breath. If someone is trying to use me as a tool to threaten his welfare, the worst thing you can do is send me away. Because whoever is watching this house does not care about Oliver sleeping, and I do. Marcus looked at her for a long time. My grandmother cared for Helena's grandfather for 4 years, Nadia said. I didn't know that. But she was a nurse and she was good at her job, and she took care of people because that was what she knew how to do. That's the only inheritance I got from her. It's enough. She met his eyes. It's enough. Marcus was quiet. Then he turned to Roy. Pull everything you have on Garrett Belmore. I want to know who he's been in contact with, and I want the exterior cameras upgraded by tomorrow morning. Roy nodded and left. Marcus looked back at Nadia. Oliver showed me his drawing this morning, he said. The one with the 2 figures under the stars. I saw it. He told me the tall one was you. A pause. He said the short one was him. He said you were both outside because outside wasn't scary with the right person. The kitchen was very quiet. Don't go anywhere, Marcus said. It wasn't an order, exactly. It was something more uncertain than that. I wasn't planning to, Nadia said. Roy was efficient. Within 36 hours, he had a name, a phone number, and a photograph. A man named Garrett Belmore had hired a private investigator, licensed in Ontario, operating just inside the legal limits of surveillance, to document what he was calling instability and irregular staff behavior in the Caruso household. The investigator had photographed Nadia's arrival and departure, documented her background, and produced a report suggesting that her connection to the Belmore family history was evidence of a potential conflict of interest in the child's care. It was thin. Garrett's lawyer had apparently told him so, but thin was enough to file, and filing was enough to delay, and delay in estate law was the whole game. The night Roy presented this to Marcus, Nadia was down the hall humming Oliver to sleep, and Marcus was standing in the kitchen with his hands flat on the counter and an expression on his face that Roy had only seen twice before, once when the 401 called, and once when a business partner of 15 years had tried to move money out of a joint account without telling him. In the morning, Marcus called his lawyer. His lawyer called Garrett Belmore's lawyer. What was communicated in that call, Nadia did not know in detail. What she knew was that it resulted in the private investigator filing an amended report, Garrett withdrawing his petition to reassess the estate, and Roy upgrading the security on the exterior cameras and adding 2 new staff to the overnight roster. She knew, also, that Marcus came and told her himself. He found her in Oliver's room during the boys' afternoon reading time, the 2 of them cross-legged on the floor with a book about ocean trenches open between them. He stood in the doorway, and Oliver looked up and said, "Dad, did you know the Mariana Trench is deeper than Everest is tall?" "I did know that," Marcus said. "Nadia didn't." "I didn't," Nadia confirmed. Marcus looked at his son, and then at Nadia, and something in his face did what it had been carefully avoiding for weeks. "When he's settled," he said to Nadia, "would you come to the study?" Oliver made a small sound of theatrical protest. Marcus said, 20 minutes, Ol. 20 minutes later, she sat in the study, and Marcus stood by the window and told her about Garrett and the investigator and the amended report and the withdrawn petition. He was precise and concise and left nothing out. When he finished, she said, so it's over? Garrett will try again eventually. He's that kind of man. But for now, yes. He turned from the window. The late afternoon light made him look, briefly, like someone who hadn't forgotten how to be tired. I handled this badly. I let the coincidence about your grandmother become evidence against you in my mind before I'd given you any reason to distrust you. He paused. I want to apologize for that. Nadia looked at him. You have a 6-year-old and a property dispute, and someone looked in your son's window. Your caution was reasonable. The way I applied it wasn't. She accepted the distinction. Okay, you've been here 5 weeks, he said. In 5 weeks, Oliver has started sleeping, started eating, started talking about his mother. Not the accident, but her, the way she was. His voice was very controlled, but she could hear what was under it. He told me she would have liked you. Nadia looked down at her hands for a moment. He also told me, Marcus said, that you always stay until he's properly asleep. You don't just leave when he stops moving. You wait until you know. My mother used to do that, Nadia said. I always knew when she left. There's a difference in the room, yes. He was quiet. There is. The study held the particular silence of rooms where a great deal has been not said for a long time. I'd like to offer you a permanent position, Marcus said, not as Oliver's night carer, as I don't have an exact title for it, but you'd be involved in his care during the day as well. The education component. You have the training that you haven't been using. He paused. The pay would be adjusted accordingly. Joel's hospital fees would be settled. Immediately, Nadia looked at him for a long moment. That's a significant offer. You're the first person who's known when to leave the room and when to stay, he said, simply. That's not a small thing. She thought about the diner on Bloor, the double shifts, the way her feet had started to feel like they'd been borrowed from someone older. I'd want it in writing, she said. A faint something crossed his face that was not quite a smile but was adjacent to one. Roy will have the paperwork ready by morning. She stood to go. At the door, she paused. He told me about the sound, Helena's sound, the humming. She didn't look back at him. I think your grandmother must have hummed it, in the Belmore house, where mine was working, and your grandmother taught it to Helena, or Helena just absorbed it, the way children absorb the sounds of safety. And my grandmother brought it home and hummed it at her own stove, and I absorbed it from her. She paused. It's not a coincidence, it's just how comfort travels. Quietly, without anyone intending it. She heard him draw a slow breath. Good night, Mr. Caruso, she said. Good night, Nadia, he said. It was the first time he'd used her name. 6 months later, the Caruso house sounded different in the evenings. Oliver had a bedtime that he mostly respected. He'd started asking to leave a lamp on after all, not because darkness frightened him, but because he liked to read. He left drawings everywhere, under Nadia's door, on the kitchen counter for Grace, one memorable one taped to Roy's chair, which Roy had removed without expression and which was later found by Grace, tucked into his desk drawer. Joel visited on Sundays. He and Oliver had developed an inexplicable rapport based entirely on a shared interest in catastrophic geological events and a mutual suspicion of mushrooms as a food group. He would sit at the kitchen table and listen to Oliver explain pyroclastic flows while eating Grace's soup, and Nadia would watch them from the doorway and feel something loosen in her chest that had been tight for a very long time. Marcus had started joining them for dinner on Sundays. Not formally, not announced. He'd simply begun appearing in the kitchen around 6, and Grace had begun setting a 5th place without being asked. One evening in May, after Oliver was settled and Joel had taken the streetcar home and Grace had gone for the night, Marcus found Nadia on the back porch with a cup of tea, looking at the garden. The stone wall was still there. The boot marks were long grown over. He sat down in the other chair without asking. They sat for a while without speaking, which was something they'd gotten better at. Oliver wants to learn the sound, Marcus said eventually. The humming. He asked me if I knew it. Do you? To ask you. Nadia smiled at the garden. He already did. Last week, he's been practicing. Another pause. Is he good at it? He's 6, she said. He hums it like he hums everything. Enthusiastically and slightly off-key. Marcus made a sound that was unambiguously a laugh. A real one, low and brief and genuine, and Nadia had the impression of something structural relaxing, not collapsing, just releasing the tension it no longer needed to hold. It occurred to her, sitting there with the May dark settling around the garden, that comfort really did travel quietly, that a woman had hummed in a kitchen in Sostane. Marie and a man had grown up in the same house where her granddaughter would work, and a sound had passed between families like something borrowed, and what it had borrowed against was grief, and what it had paid back slowly, was the ability to sleep. Oliver came to her door that night at 9:45. He stood there in his pajamas holding his volcano book. "I can't sleep," he said. "Can you hum it?" She held out her hand. He came and sat on the floor with her, his shoulder warm against her arm, and she hummed the sound her mother had made at the stove. Low and wandering, not quite a melody, just the noise a person makes when they are all right, when the world is hard but they are here. Oliver was asleep by 10, and from somewhere down the hall she heard nothing. Not silence, exactly, but rest. The particular quiet of a house that has finally decided to let the night be gentle.